Welcome to the Bundoffler episode. This is episode 60. I'm your host, Fevzi Hussein, and on this episode, we are going to be covering the recent elections in Turkey. The first round occurred the previous weekend, and there's now going to be a runoff second round election. I'm really pleased to bring you a diverse range of political views in terms of the subject matter. On your screen, obviously you'll be listening on Spotify as well, but we're really delighted to have three great candidates. You have Edward Rowe. Edward is a writer and communications professional, written extensively about the country and its neighbours, and among other titles, his work has appeared in the Caspian Post, Daily Sabah, and the T Vine magazine. Edward, welcome to Bundoffler.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure.
And we've also delighted to have Emi Kayserili-Oğlu. Emi is a creative thinker and a political commentator with a strong interest in Eastern Mediterranean affairs. She has an entrepreneurial flair, as she's also the founder of Trudia. I hope I pronounced that right, Emi. And massive respect also to Emi. She's a cancer survivor 3 times over. Welcome to the show, Emi.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.
Okay. And also on the show tonight, we have Ertan Karpazlı. Ertan is London-based, Turkish Cypriot journalist who lived in Istanbul for a total of 9 years between 2010 and 2019, so under the Recep Erdogan period. He spent 4 years in Turkey working for the national English language broadcaster TRT World, and has also in the past been published in Politics Today, Daily Sabah, T Vine, Straturka, and the Fletcher Forum, as well as hosting political debate programs on Euro Genç TV. So a warm welcome to you all, colleagues. I guess the obvious place to start off with, Erdogan's been in power for quite a long time now, if you consider the prime ministerial spell and his current presidential spell. I want to touch on initially kind of some legacy issues, what your reflections are over that period, what you think has worked well for people in Turkey, what maybe hasn't worked so well. I'm going to come to you first, Edward, if I may, please.
Of course. So I think for me, I'll say something positive and something negative. I think on the one hand, Mr. Erdogan has certainly invigorated and empowered other people that come from a kind of a Sunni Muslim conservative background that have previously been disenfranchised and kind of seen as sort of non-ideal citizens, if you like, in the eyes of the state. I think that's really, really significant, really, really important to bear in mind. And I think we can see the evidence of that in what the opposition against him have done as well. For example, making a coalition of, kind of 6 parties, 3 of which kind of come from the same world as Mr. Erdogan does as well. They've made that group of people, or Mr. Erdogan rather has made that group of people, people to be sought after, people to be courted, people who can kind of hold their heads high and be respected by the wider society. But then on the other hand as well, another kind of great part of his legacy is polarization as well. Which is it's not really a great thing for any country, let alone one as important to the rest of the world as Turkey. And I think we can see that in the sense that this election is being treated by some, and certainly the Good Party or EE Party leader Meral Akşener called it a referendum on Mr. Erdogan. So we can kind of see what a polarizing figure he is as well. I'd say, yeah, those are the 2 kind of major legacy points that I would say within Turkey.
Brilliant. Thanks, Edward, for that start. That's a really good opener. Emine, what's your initial kind of thoughts, your reactions in terms of, this period that Erdogan's been in charge? What sort of legacy has he left for us to ponder?
What he's left, I can't comment on, but what I would like to say is he had a great opportunity, just like Edward has said. He inherited a place where piousness was looked down upon. And I lived in Istanbul during 20 years, and I saw people gain respect. He inherited something which was defunct. It was he inherited a society where piousness was looked down upon. He came into power during a time where there were people like Önder Sav and Deniz Baykal who would just sit there and basically watch things go by without being active in politics at all. So he had the perfect playground to prove himself, to show himself. He had great opportunities with the Kurdish problems, and he really took it up a couple of notches. So that was what I thought would be his legacy. But the polarization, as Edward has commented on, is one of the saddest things for me personally when I look back at what he's done. And there is a wound that runs so deep that the two far ends, the pious and the non-pious, they will never meet in peace because the wounds are so deep they won't heal. It'll take a lot more time. And I think he's used that in the last few years to remain in power, unfortunately, whereas he had so many opportunities to shine and to pave the way for a kind of new leadership. So somewhere along the line, I think he lost his way.
Thank you, Emine. Interesting thoughts there. Ertan, what's your thoughts on Erdogan's legacy and his period as leader up to now?
Well, I don't really have much else to add beyond what Emmy and Edward have already said. They're completely spot on in their reflections. However, I can say that what Erdogan has done overall throughout the 20-odd years that he's been in power in Turkey is that he's created a shift in the paradigm, in the political paradigm in Turkey. He has awoken a new sense of belonging in the kind of global sphere of where Turkey is, Turkey's sphere of influence. He's awoken a sleeping giant, really, in what Turkey once was. Once when it was a part of the when it was the spearhead of the Ottoman Empire. Since then, since 1923, Turkey has been pretty much asleep. And in these 20 years, he's done it very, very slowly, very, very slyly, very subtly. He has awoken that sense of pride that Turks once had. And Turks now can see themselves as a global player, not just a regional power, but a global power. And whether Erdogan wins or not in the runoff for the election, that will remain in place regardless. And that's going to be something that will last for decades, even after Erdogan has gone. And I can imagine whatever leadership follows Erdogan, because eventually he will be replaced. Whether he loses this election or not, nobody stays in power forever. But whoever inherits Turkey in the future will inherit something that they can work with and that they can build upon. Whereas, as Emmy said, when Erdogan came to power, there was nothing there to begin with. So he's given Turkey a good foundation, a good basis from which it can grow. And, perhaps in 100 years' time, it could once again rekindle that power that it once had under the Ottoman Empire.
I think before we go on to sort of the next set of questions, I think there's no doubt that Erdogan has been flexing Turkey's muscles as a regional power. And, the Islamist cause, if you like, has been championed very, very strongly. And when I speak to Muslims, non-Turkish Muslims, they see him as a very powerful Muslim leader, and almost look to him for intervention sometimes. So I think you're right, Ertan. There's no doubt about the status of Turkey as a regional power. And it will be interesting to see how the next few years develop, but there's always problems in place. I'm going to stick with you, Ertan, and just touch on some of the issues. We're going to go into the role Turkey's played in terms of the Ukraine and Russia conflict, but I want to touch on the aspect of NATO, and the fact that Turkey has almost been a fly in the ointment, if you like, in terms of Sweden and Finland, who are both desperate to come into NATO. I think there's been some backtracking by Turkey, but I just wondered what your thoughts were in terms of how Turkey's been playing those cards, in terms of whether you think they've been playing a decent hand on the NATO discussions with Ukraine as well.
Yeah, well, I've always seen Erdogan as a pro-Western leader, regardless of his kind of Islamist political background. I think the Islamism comes in when it comes to domestic politics. That's where his voter base comes from. Considering that Turkey is majority Sunni Muslim country, most people in Turkey are conservative, and most people are rural in Turkey, and that's actually his main power base within Turkey. So that's where the Islamism comes in. But when it comes to Turkey's foreign policy, I believe Erdogan has always been very much pro-Western, and I think that he knows, and the state in general, and I'm talking about the army, I'm talking about the kind of players in the background. I think they all know that Turkey's place is always with the West. However, what Turkey has always wanted from the West is a better deal. So if you remember, in this country, before the Brexit happened, before the referendum happened even, David Cameron went around the entire European Union seeking a better deal for the UK within the EU. And very similarly, this is what Erdogan has been doing in the past 20 years. He's been seeking a better deal for Turkey within the Western Bloc. And at times, he's kind of played, he's threatened, in terms of teaming up with Russia or teaming up with China. He's kind of threatened, he's played the Eurasianist card. But that's only to kind of make Europe fear and to remind Europe of Turkey's importance within that Western Bloc. And he will do whatever he can to get Turkey a better deal. And sometimes that might seem counterproductive for Turkey's European and Western allies. But it's really, he probably feels that's the only way that he can get the West to listen to him and to take Turkey seriously. If this is a partnership where everyone's an equal player, then everyone has to have their needs met. And Turkey feels a lot of the time, especially with the war that was taking place in Syria, and especially with the Eastern Mediterranean problem, Turkey often feels that it's being ignored. So Turkey is basically saying, hey, if you want me to do you a favor, you need to do me a favor. So that's the game Erdogan's playing. And I think up until now, it's pretty much worked.
Interesting comments. I mean, Emino, in terms of, we'll move away from the NATO angle, unless, of course, you want to add something else. And Ertan touched very eloquently on the whole kind of around the EU, and the fact that, if you remember, a few years ago, I think Egemen Bağış was the EU Turkish government spokesperson for EU relations, and Mr. Bağış was a very polished character, and Turkey's EU aspirations at the time were looking very strong, I thought. But I think Ertan has a fair point. It isn't just a matter of joining at all costs. It's got to be the right deal for Turkey. And there's been criticism of the EU being a sort of Christian club, if you like, I don't know what your thoughts, Emine, were on, whether I think Ünal Çevikos, who's the senior foreign affairs state spokesperson for Kılıçdaroğlu's party, he's very keen to reignite strong relations with the EU. So I don't know whether you think if Erdogan is successful in the runoff, realistically, whether that's going to develop positively, or I don't know if you've got different thoughts on that.
Well, my thoughts are both Erdogan, Turkey, and the EU made really huge mistakes with their dialogue, with their negotiations. Erdogan was the strong man. He, like Ertan said, he wanted to deliver to his country promises that were made and were not kept. However, from my perspective, having been brought up in the UK, having been exposed to a certain kind of politics and diplomacy, and having lived in Turkey during the times when they had the Mon shares, what I sensed over the years was they changed lanes. So the art of diplomacy seemed to shrivel up. And suddenly you have this powerful character. You have this strong man who has decisions, he has opinions, and he wants these to be to listen to and to be taken note of. But we all know that politics is something that is about give and take. And what goes on behind the scenes is really important. And so what I thought was there wasn't enough dancing behind the scenes. We didn't have those characters in place to do negotiations, to give a little, to take a little. Also, being a strong man, Erdogan doesn't delegate. He tells it as it is, and he pretty much makes it known what he wants. So I don't think this played very well with the EU. And then during the Brexit campaign, I remember horrified looking at those ads that were saying, the Turks are going to raid England. I mean, that was quite embarrassing. I didn't know how to react, to be honest with you. And the mistakes that the EU made ended up justifying some of Erdogan's politics. So it was a very balanced tug of war. Both sides made huge mistakes, which they're both still paying for today. What happens after the elections remains to be seen. But for sure, Turkey needs to build bridges slowly with the West, and it needs to be about give and take. It needs to be transparent. There needs to be deals done behind closed doors, but there needs to be a healthy dialogue. And to be honest with you, I don't think there's been a healthy dialogue for a very long time.
Yeah, there's some very insightful comments there. Thanks, Emine. The adverts that you point to, actually, as much as they were offensive, and it's all part of, unfortunately, the current Tory government's racist immigration lines, I actually found the thought of 70 million Turks coming to England quite amusing, because as someone of Turkish heritage, you just know Turkish people wouldn't leave Turkey to come to a horrible climate like the United Kingdom. But I mean, there was a very horrible undertone, obviously, to that message, and it really did spike.
It was offensive.
It spiked xenophobia towards the Turkish community, sadly. So, Edward, if I could come to you, I don't know if you want to add anything on the EU point, and we're going to go into some more foreign policy aspects, but I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
No, I think Emine and Ertan have covered that very cool. Satisfactorily.
Okay, so on foreign policy, we've sort of touched on the fact that Erdogan's standing as a global leader, if you like, he's almost a little bit like Marmite. Some people really love him, and some people don't like him so much. But his standing is impressive. The fact, in relation, if we look at the Ukraine-Russia conflict, Turkey has played a really important role in terms of the little progress, if you like, in terms of the small signs of cooperation that we've seen. How do you think that Erdogan's managed to facilitate that, keep that relationship with Putin relatively warm, but at the same time, offering solidarity to Zelensky and Ukraine? It's quite a delicate juggling act, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's been really quite impressive to see. I think Mr. Erdogan and Mr. Putin have they've built up, I would say, quite cozy relations over quite a long time, and I think both countries gain a lot from one another. Certainly, Turkey is very happy to welcome Russian tourists, particularly to places like Antalya. There's also important bilateral trade going on between the two powers as well. So I think those things make Turkey a trusted partner for Russia, and I think we kind of saw that come to a head really, not only when we saw peace talks, or at least talks a bit in that direction taking place between Ukraine and Russia in Istanbul, and then also, of course, Turkey was a major part of the grain deal as well, that ensured Russian and Ukrainian grain the chance to leave the Black Sea and get to various other parts of the world where it's needed. So I think there's certainly been a lot of benefit to Mr. Erdogan and Turkey and its kind of geopolitical status in having a good relationship with Russia. But then again, the two countries, they cooperate and they compete like most countries do with one another. So we've also seen at the same time, and I'm not sure how the Russians feel about it behind closed doors, but we saw, for example, Turkish Bayraktar drones, very cheap but also effective drones, being deployed by Ukrainian forces as well. So effectively, to the extent that Ukrainian soldiers were actually writing songs about, or wrote a song about the Bayraktar drone. So not sure quite how that part is viewed in Moscow, but certainly the two countries, Russia and Turkey, do, I would say, need one another. And yeah, certainly there are some important and warm ties there still too.
Yeah, and I guess there's an energy reliance as well, isn't there? I think in terms of both through Russia and Ukraine. So Turkey's managing to maintain a relatively healthy supply of gas, whereas other countries have really struggled, and consumers have really paid the price with massive hikes in energy costs. So that's been interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Emine, in terms of let's touch on a domestic front, which is kind of touches around migration / immigration. If we look at and it is an impressive role that Turkey played in terms of bringing huge numbers of Syrian refugees into Turkey. I think the current count is about 4 million. And if you think how terrified the government here is in the UK when we get 35,000 over a period of 12 months, it really does put it into context. But in terms of some of the domestic issues like migration, we have seen some quite unpleasant scenes towards the Syrian refugees. And it has been a bit of an election talking point by the parties in terms of, trying to, on one hand, trying to be constructive around the issue, but also, unfortunately, creating some hostile views towards our Syrian brothers and sisters. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
My thoughts were when the refugees were brought in. I think Turkey played a huge humanitarian role. I think it's something that has to be commended. Could have been better managed. I think it was awesome. They opened their doors. If it was better managed, I think they would have shown the world a great example to follow, how you can help your neighbor without suffering. What happened was, I think the flow wasn't controlled very well. And while there were, legitimate refugees flowing in, I think different types of people also flowed in. And then I don't think they were very clear with the numbers. And of course, the press, the media, the propaganda, unemployment, poverty, and then it's very easy to stick blame on refugees. Of course, the refugees will come to big cities if they're not put into appropriate places, into appropriate places where they can be monitored and helped. So I think there was a huge influx. And then it isn't pleasant, but then when you start blaming these people, and of course, all of them aren't the best citizens. Of course, you're going to have riffraff among them. So, fights break out, thieving, stealing rises. In Istanbul, particularly, you'd hear a lot of news about women being manhandled by these foreign refugees, these Syrians. So a lot of the Syrians, unfortunately, got a bad name. So this thing that started off as a great humanitarian campaign turned into something that became very ugly. And even now, using those people as a bargaining chip, I think it's horrific. I mean, I feel bad that even Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu has to sort of use that as a ploy to increase his votes, to say, we'll send them all back. It's really quite sad. So again, what was something that was hugely commendable, it was a great humanitarian an example to set. I think because it was badly managed, it got out of hand, and at the end, it's just become a mess. So, like, how do you send back people who've set up their lives there, who've had children there, or who've invested money there, who've bought a house there, who left Syria to make a better life? What do you say? You have to go back because you're Syrian. I mean, that's a huge mess that they have to deal with, and the fact that it's become domestic politics is even more unpleasant.
Unfortunately, it's scenarios that are replicated in so many countries where the economy is suffering, and you effectively described it as scapegoating of some, and it's very, very unfortunate to see. I haven't got the actual figures in front of me, but the whole humanitarian effort I think Turkey got some support from the EU as well. But the financial cost to the Turkish purse is phenomenal. Billions and billions of pounds, and it's an ongoing cost. So it is something that needs to be managed, and I think they do absolutely need to be commended. But I think you're right. It's very sad when it's used as capital in a negative way. So. Ertan, if I can come to you, why do you think, because obviously Erdogan just about failed to get over the line in the first round. He was like 49.9 something percent. He was literally, I don't know how many votes away. And Kılıçdaroğlu has formed this alliance with six parties in total. When you look at the state of the economy, I think last year it hit a high of 85%. Inflation in Turkey last October it's down to about 40% at the moment, I think. But when you've got those real hot domestic issues which don't reflect well on the government, I'm going to touch on the tragedy with the earthquakes as well, because our people in North Cyprus were affected by that as well. But when you think about the massive earthquake in, I think in 99, and so many people died, and then they brought in the vergi, the deprem vergisi, and so people were paying these taxes, and we've seen the construction companies. So there's a lot of kickback on that. But why do you think the other parties haven't been able to make the collateral that they should have maybe? And Erdogan is still, even with that alliance, Erdogan seems to be in quite a strong position.
It's a very good question, and I've said this for a very long time now. The reason why Erdogan has lasted so long is not because of the strength of the government. It's because of the weakness of the opposition. and the opposition have had many golden opportunities to get rid of Erdogan through democratic elections, and they've not seized those opportunities. And as you said, since at least since 2013, which when you look on, Erdogan's reign, it's like about midway through his reign. Erdogan has been on a downward spiral. Okay, we can say until 2013, so until, let's say, around the time of the Gezi Park riots, Erdogan he had huge momentum behind him. It was victory after victory, and Turkey's economy was doing really well. I mean, when I moved to Turkey in 2010, I think the pound was about 2.4 Turkish lira. In 2013, Turkey managed to pay off its debt to the IMF. Erdogan had huge momentum behind him, but then after the Gezi Park riots, and then you had the whole incident of the Arab Spring backfiring, losing a key ally in Morsi in Egypt, the economic problems, and then, culminating in the earthquake, which happened a couple of months ago. Erdogan has basically experienced a huge number of blows, which has brought down his popularity, yet still the opposition are not able to bring him down. Now, I want to have a brief look at who could have been some of the candidates from the opposition. Now, obviously, we have Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, who selected himself to represent his alliance from the opposition. But there were others who are possibly more popular than him, who could have taken that role. Meral Akşener, for example, İmamoğlu, for example, Mansur Yavaş, for example. Now, Mansur Yavaş is an interesting one, because Mansur Yavaş separated himself from MHP, which is Turkey's right-wing nationalist party, which is currently allied to Erdogan. And his problem with MHP was its allegiance with Erdogan, which, he sees Erdogan as an Islamist. So what we have in Mansur Yavaş, who's the governor of Ankara, very popular, probably the most popular politician in Turkey today, is we have a Turkish nationalist, which always bodes well for a country like Turkey, where nationalism is quite high, but he's also a secularist. Now, you'll find that a lot of Turks, including those who support Erdogan, are actually nationalists and secularists. Now, keep in mind that Erdogan has many secular parties backing him as well. It's not as polarized, as black and white as other people make it out to be. So I would have thought that Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, if he was genuine about winning this election, he would have chosen someone like Mansur Yavaş to represent the opposition. However, I think Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu has been hell-bent on coming into power himself. He seized the opportunity, and he thought that he could stand a chance winning. You notice in the past that whenever Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu feels that opposition doesn't have a genuine chance of winning, he never puts himself forward. For example, you had what was his name again? Ekmelettin İhsanoğlu, right? Was that 2014? Complete flop. Ended up joining an MHP. He's now supporting Erdogan, right? And then you had sorry, remind me of his name. Muharrem İnce. Again, he was actually a threat to Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu from within the opposition, and that was Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu's way of bringing Muharrem İnce down, because Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu knew that the opposition didn't have a genuine chance of winning that election, in the last election. In this occasion, he felt that the opposition had a genuine chance, and that's why he put himself forward. However, what Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu has failed to do in his how many years of being the leader of the opposition, he's failed to tap into the psyche of the general Turkish population. He's failed to do that. Now, you've got other people like Mansur Yavaş who can. Now, let's see what happened in the first round of that election. And I'm gonna cut it short soon, because I know I'm going on a bit. But Erdogan got around 49 point something percent. Kılıçdaroğlu got around 44 point something percent.
Yeah.
But what about that 5%? That 5% went to who? Sinan Ogan.
Yeah.
Ogan, I don't know his surname. He, Sinan Ogan, very similar to Mansour Yavaş, right? Also separated from MHP, is also a nationalist and is also a secularist, right? Now, if Mansour Yavaş had been a candidate for the opposition in this election, there would be absolutely no need for Sinan Ogan to stand. That 5% would have gone to Mansour Yavaş, it would have gone to the opposition, and the opposition would have won the election. But those 5% of people who voted for Sinan Ogan are people who are dissatisfied with Erdogan, but also do not trust Kılıçdaroğlu. So they voted for Sinan Ogan.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why neither Erdogan or Kılıçdaroğlu managed to get past the threshold. Now, the interesting question is, in the second round, what's that 5% going to do? They are now the kingmakers in this election.
Yeah.
Now, some who feel more inclined to secularism might vote for Kılıçdaroğlu. Some who feel more inclined to nationalism might vote for Erdogan. Assuming that vote is split 50-50, so each side gets 2.5%, Erdogan's going to win the election. But if Mansur Yavaş had been the candidate in the first place for the opposition, I reckon there would be no need for a second round. Mansur Yavaş would be the president of Turkey today. So, in a nutshell, yeah, it's the opposition failing to seize their golden opportunities, and the government cannot be blamed for that.
Yeah, some interesting analysis there, Ertan, and I think there was a really good piece in the Washington Post recently on the elections in Turkey, and I think that a lot of the points you just made was echoed in that piece. Edward, you were nodding in agreement to what Ertan was saying. Do you think Kılıçdaroğlu is going to have to resign if he's not successful in the runoff?
I mean, it's a very good question, because, you know, his party is, I mean, he's never really won a national election that he's gone into before, but still hasn't resigned. So, I mean, he might cling on, but I think his position becomes more and more untenable if he does lose this time round. But I think as well, I think Ersan made some really important points there around kind of courting, around having a candidate with more nationalist appeal. But it's something as well I noticed being discussed on social media as well, was that you know, kind of another kind of big group of voters, which is quite distant from the nationalist camp, we can say, is you know, we can think about Kurdish voters as well that make up a huge proportion of the country. There were some people expressing regret that this time the party that focuses on Kurdish issues, the Yeşil Sol Partisi, or the Green Left Party, they were saying that perhaps if they had fielded a candidate of their own, they might have found themselves in that kingmaker position as well. And it's quite likely too that you know, had that happened and there had been a second round, a lot of those Kurdish voters that would have pulled the lever for the YSP might well have voted for the other opposition candidate, even if they were a bit more on the nationalist side. And we kind of did see that alliance sort of materializing somewhat at the last election when Muharrem İnce was the candidate. Certainly in, you know, kind of the community in the United Kingdom of the kind of Turkish citizen diaspora, a lot of them, or the majority of them, are of Kurdish background. And we found a lot of them, when we were looking at the results, we saw that many of them had voted for the then HDP, or People's Democratic Party, which is now kind of changed into the YSP, but also voting for İnce, the main opposition CHP candidate as well. So that kind of synergy was there, and that could have been something that the opposition could have capitalized on, but seems like they failed to do that this time round.
Some really good points. Emine, I mean, in terms of the demographics of Turkey, everyone's position on kind of women's rights, if you like, are well documented. You know, domestic violence issues, issues around LGBTQI these are sizable groups of people as well who I would imagine, would be less inclined to vote for the incumbent. So again, going back to sort of the question I posed to Ertan, I mean, isn't it quite worrying that the opposition can't, our conversation is almost crystallizing as it develops, but the opposition really isn't getting its act together, is it, when you bring those issues into the equation?
Okay, for me, it's quite the contrary. I think Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, he's worked arduously, and I think he's made huge progress, because one of the problems that I personally find in Turkey is either you're religious or you're nationalistic. There's more to Turkey than that. And so, this table of six, he's actually succeeded in bringing together Islamists, slightly nationalistic. I mean, keeping Meral Akşener at the table was very masterful. And there's a reality. I mean, Turkey has a lot of Kurdish citizens, and these people need a voice. Why should they be not considered? And this was a debate I had with my husband about why can't, HDP be invited to the table? And he explained to me that the nationalistic side of people in Turkey is so strong that, they'll just do anything to spite their own noses. So in terms of what Ertan and Edward have said, I mean, I agree. But actually, Kılıçdaroğlu has taken a very important step in uniting the people of Turkey. And it's brave. I mean, his message of brotherhood, his message of not distinguishing between headscarfed and non-headscarfed, or the Kurds or the LGBTQ populations. He's embracing all. And this is what a lot of people in Turkey have been waiting for, an embracing act. He isn't a strong character. He's not a strong man like Erdogan, but he's promising something that is what the Turkish people need. So I don't think that he's lost before due to his lackluster performance. It's that there are huge groups in Turkey, and these groups basically, without questioning, decide who they want their tailor to be. And if they're pious, then unconditionally they will go for Erdogan. Or if they're nationalistic, without doubt, they will go for the MHP. But when you look at what they've achieved in the last 10 years, it's questionable. Women's murders have gone up drastically. Unfortunately, it's sad, but the LGBTQ are used as insults, or women are called sluts. I mean, maybe this is national politics, but it's very unpleasant. And on the other hand, you have a Gandhi-like figure who's, he's a 70-year-old man, but he's striving to create something that's unified. And the closer Turkey gets to being unified, the better it will be for all the groups. So that's my take on that. Maybe I'm a little bit of a Pollyanna, but I think unity is what's required, and that's what he wants to deliver.
I did promise some diverse subject. Ertan, you indicated to come back in, my friend. So the floor's yours.
Yeah, I just wanted to make 2 points on the back of what Emmy has just said. First of all, one thing that I witnessed in my 10 years living in Turkey was that some of the changes that Erdogan has made in his time are now so ingrained in Turkish culture and Turkish society that there's no way to reverse it. It will take at least 50 years to reverse it. So, for example, the headscarf issue. The headscarf issue, the people who had headscarves when Erdogan first came into power, they were so suppressed in the 90s that they had no voice, they had no presence in open societies. They couldn't go into public buildings, they couldn't go to universities, they couldn't graduate. And when Erdogan first slowly started to lift the hijab ban, the headscarf ban, there was a lot of resistance to it from those opposed to it. But now, because it's been like 10 years and people have kind of got used to seeing women in headscarves again in Turkey, even the opposition, even the parties that would have once opposed it, have now come to accept it. And although I commend Kılıçdaroğlu for giving a platform for more religious people, pious people, and women with headscarves within the opposition, there's an Islamist party, as Emi said, that supports opposition as well. Even though I commend Kılıçdaroğlu for that, I can't help but think that a part of that is down to Erdogan. And secondly, yes, Kılıçdaroğlu has brought together a number of different groups. He's brought together secularist groups, Islamist groups, right-wing nationalist groups, Kurdish groups. He's got all sorts of groups within his alliance, and there are also parties outside of that alliance that support him as well. However, what is the current thing that's uniting all of these parties? Because they are so different to one another. And I feel that the one thing that is uniting these parties right now is that the one thing they have in common is they want to get rid of Erdogan. And once Erdogan is gone, once Erdogan is out of the picture, I don't know how long that unity is going to last. I don't know how much stability that alliance can provide Turkey. Whereas when you look at MHP and AK Party and generally the parties that support them, yes, they have the odd left-wing communist party that supports them as well. Yes, you have Kurdish groups that support them as well. They are just as diverse. But on the whole, you feel that their unity isn't based on being in spite of one party or one ideology or one person. That's a more natural unity, and that's a unity I can see lasting longer, regardless of the result of this election. And that's a stability that Turkey needs and Turks crave for. And I just feel that the unity that Kılıçdaroğlu is presenting is not long-lasting and is not going to give people the stability they're craving.
Interesting point. A speculative point, but you know, I guess the proof will be in the pudding after the election, and we'll, you know, the kind of political fallout will play out. Edward, we're coming towards the end of the show. I mean, the quality of the debate's been fantastic. We're overrunning our original kind of 30-minute planned window. In terms of some of the kind of more fractious aspects of Erdogan's leaderships, in terms of that region, if you like, I'm not going to touch on sort of Armenia, but in terms of Greece and the Eastern Mediterranean, how do you think that's played out? Because there was some unhelpful rhetoric in the not too distant past. Although relations, certainly between Turkey and Greece, have really warmed. I think Greece's response to the tragedy in the southeast with the huge earthquake was absolutely fantastic. The passion, the humanitarianism shown by our Greek brothers and sisters was absolutely spot on, and you can't help but draw respect from that. So I think that's helped, but you know, in terms of, and I will come to Ertan and Emine on this point, I know you both got very, you know, strong interest in it. But in terms of like Cyprus, obviously, it's still divided. Turkish Cypriots are still looking for, you know, solutions if you follow the current political dialogue there. How do you think that's going to play out in terms of some of those Eastern Mediterranean relationships that Turkey has with its neighbours?
Well, that's quite a lot to cover there.
Yeah. Let's couch it in the sense of, if Erdogan wins, do you think it's going to be business as usual, or if Kılıçdaroğlu wins, do you think? I mean, their kind of dialogue, or that what they've been putting out in the media, they're trying to suggest that there'll be a very different approach. So I don't know what you think will happen.
Well, I think if I may, firstly, what I'd like to touch on is I always have hope for Turkey and Greece. I think, as you mentioned earlier, I think, you know, sometimes crises, they sort of show you who your friends are or who wants to be your friend.
Yeah.
And I have to say, I was quite moved as well. I mean, my wife is Turkish, so, you know, I've got skin in the game, if you like. You know, what affects Turkey would affect me too. And I was quite touched to see yeah, you know, how Greece responded, you know, in sending support to Turkey, and both countries have done that to each other in the past as well when there have been earthquakes, which was always really encouraging to see. I mean, certainly we've seen yeah, we've seen from I mean, how can I say? Yeah, in terms of Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu, of course, I mean, he did say that in terms of his foreign policy, he would like to kind of pursue a more kind of Western-friendly, kind of pro-Western model. Mr. Erdogan kind of talking about a slightly more kind of balanced policy, and kind of greater involvement in kind of global regions. But it's yeah, it's I think really on yeah, on Greece and Turkey, I do have a lot of hope. I have hope there in spite of what's going on. But I think probably it's better if Emine and Ertan, being the Eastern Mediterraneans on the panel, if you like, touch on those, you know, kind of being closer to the action, if you like. They might be better suited.
Thanks, Ed. I mean, if we let's focus on Cyprus then, as a kind of issue that's clearly Turkey has an interest in. How do you see things panning out if Erdogan wins, and if the alternative happens and the opposition wins? Emine, I'll come to you first, and then Ertan.
To be honest with you, I'm not too sure about what Kılıçdaroğlu and his table of six have in mind. With Cyprus, I have two points I'd like to make. One is the reality on the ground. I mean, the northern part of the island is in a dire situation economically. I don't think the country is being run particularly well. I think there's some realizations that haven't quite occurred in the minds of Turkish Cypriot politicians. I mean, you can't claim to be independent yet have to wait and see what Turkey decides. You have to decide whether you want to be aligned in every single way with Turkey and do as Turkey says, or whether you really want to have your own nation. One of the issues that I have with Cyprus, also with Turkey, is the diaspora. I think our diaspora as Turkish Cypriots are not very well informed about what's going on in the island. I don't think they are very clear about what's going on in Turkey. And here we have the power of the media. So they're all watching these channels that are pouring out the same kind of news. And I've experienced it in several ways where, you know, people make the most amazing comments, and you're like, do we live on the same planet? So the diaspora needs to be better informed if they want to play a more active role in the future of Cyprus. But as for what the future holds for us, it remains to be seen. If Erdogan wins again, I think that we will probably end up being another vilayet. I've forgotten the English word for that. Will be like another additional district of Turkey, because the way things are at the moment, they're not sustainable. As to what Kılıçdaroğlu and his table of six want to promise, they haven't been very clear until now. But even the youth in Turkey, I've watched interviews and debates, and young people are speaking with a rhetoric that's unbelievable. It's not tenable. We fought with our blood, so we shouldn't give back an inch of land. I mean, and these are young people asking questions to Babajan. And even he was surprised. He said, there are many, many different, layers of issues that need to be discussed. And in fact, it's Turkish Cypriots that you need to talk to about the Cyprus issue. Everybody else is talking about the Cyprus issue except the Turkish Cypriots. So very interesting. Things can happen. To be honest with you, I'm not too optimistic about the future of North Cyprus as it stands. And it breaks my heart. And considering the strategic location of Turkey, the power it can wield over its neighboring nations with real diplomacy, and not seeing that happen is heartbreaking, because there are so many opportunities for it to lead the way in the region.
Good points, Emina, definitely. Ertan, just before I bring you in, Edward indicated to come in. I don't know if you wanted to respond to any of that.
Yeah, that would be good. Sorry, if I may abuse my position on the panel just for a moment and briefly knock you out of your seat as host for a moment, Fevzi. I mean, Emina sort of touched on it, I think, but one thing that I've kind of also noticed in recent times is you've seen other countries like Azerbaijan, and you've seen countries like kind of Pakistan as well, both kind of making very small kind of moves towards the TRNC. You've seen kind of parliamentary delegations going back and forth, or you've seen kind of business ties and delegations going back and forth. And I wondered if either Ertan or Emine might like to kind of touch on whether they think TRNC recognition is a possibility. It's something I'm genuinely very curious about and would like to know.
I think I'm more than happy to discuss that, but I think that will be for another show.
I mean, assuming maybe if we frame it in the context of
well, I mean, in terms of
the other candidate winning.
Obviously, we know, and Ertan, I'll come on to you now, because it is worth pointing out to listeners on, people watching on YouTube and listening on Spotify, that when the referendum happened in 2004, Turkey encouraged people to vote yes, the Turkish Cypriot. So, and there's been a lot of narrative since then saying Turkey's been problematic in terms of any kind of unification. But if we look at the facts in the referendum, Turkey was advocating for Turkish Cypriots to vote yes in the Kofi Annan referendum. So, but Ertan, I mean, how do you think, in terms of the geopolitical situation with Cyprus? You could touch on Greece as well, but I think Ed covered that quite well, and Emine. But certainly in terms of Cyprus, what's around the corner for us?
The whole idea of TRNC being recognized, as you said, it needs a completely different show. But if I could just quickly sum it up, there may be some limited recognition, maybe not on an international scale, but in terms of in business and in sports and things like that, there may be a limited recognition from countries that are allied to Turkey, such as Azerbaijan and Pakistan. But I don't think Turkey or North Cyprus wants another country to actually to genuinely recognize North Cyprus, because that would eclipse Turkey's power and influence in North Cyprus, which is not in either of their interests, to be honest with you. So I don't really see any major recognition happening in North Cyprus anytime soon. And as for the more wider, regional geopolitics of it all, I just want to say that I could speak at length about this, really, but I think that no matter how much Greece and Turkey, or Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots, may appear to be at odds with one another, I think ultimately they're always on the same side. And NATO is there to make sure that nothing gets out of hand, because NATO is the block, is the mechanism that keeps these countries and their borders and its people protected. Now, obviously, Cyprus is not officially part of NATO, but a situation has been created in Cyprus where NATO members, Turkey and Greece, have a presence there, have an influence there, have a say in what goes on there. And it's that presence that is keeping other more distant threats, such as Russia, which still has that still poses a danger to the Eastern Mediterranean. It keeps them out, it keeps them at bay. And I think no matter who wins the Turkish election, Turkish foreign policy is not going to change, because Turkish foreign policy is based on Turkish foreign interests, and foreign interests always remain the same. And even if a leader gets elected and wants to change things, the system and the powers that be will not allow that to happen, because we can't underestimate the power of the army in Turkey. Turkey is not necessarily a state with an army. Turkey is more like an army with a state, right? The army will not allow any elected government to come in and to do things in the region that are against Turkey's interests. The only difference is, will Turkey have a leader that is strong enough to implement Turkey's foreign policy, or will it have a leader who's not strong enough to implement that foreign policy? And I feel that in Erdogan, there is a leader who is strong enough to implement it. He says and he does. Whereas Kılıçdaroğlu, I don't know what his personal beliefs are, what his plans are, but ultimately he will be tied into following the same foreign policy, but he might not have the allies that Erdogan has in the region to do so. So that's my take on the whole Cyprus situation and the regional situation, and I don't really think much is going to change in the near future.
Thanks, Sam. That's very.
Can I just
yes,
can I just say one little thing? The situation is not sustainable in North Cyprus. I'm just waiting patiently to see, when people will realize that it's not a sustainable situation. So either the TRNC needs to do something or Turkey needs to do something, but the way it's going, it's just not tenable. It can't continue like this. So I'll be waiting with bated breath to see what happens.
Well, that leads me on to, very conveniently, onto the final point, and that is to bring your final thoughts in terms of what you think. Just before we get to that, actually, the point, I read a good piece in T-Vine, which was a kind of summary piece on the Turkish citizens living abroad and the results of the overseas people voting, Turkish citizens voting. In the UK, Kılıçdaroğlu amassed 72% of the vote, which is really interesting because it gives you a real kind of insight into the mindset of the Turkish diaspora living here in the UK. They seem to think that they want to see change. That's the impression you get from that. But look, the runoff is going to be next weekend. So final thoughts, just in terms of, I'm not going to answer you who you want to win. I'm going to ask you who you think is going to win. And just in terms of, which is a big difference, don't want to put you under the spotlight. But I want to also just ask you, if you just tell Bandoflo who you think will win on the basis of what we've seen from the first round, and also just one aspiration moving forward in terms of, hopes for Turkey and its people. Ed, I'll start with you, 30 seconds.
Ed or Ertan you said there? Is that?
Yep.
So I guess I've lost a lot of my 30 seconds there.
No, you've got 30 seconds.
Yeah, so look, I just got back from Istanbul. I saw the campaigns up close. It was my 15th visit, so always good to be in town. It was fascinating because every vote is really, it really counts, and you can see that the parties mean it, all of them. I went to pro-opposition parts of the city, like Avcılar and Bakırköy, and in those you had, for every pro-government party stand, you had 2 pro-opposition stands. So you've got people really trying to energize as much of their base as they possibly can, and catch a few kind of floating voters. I saw the opposite in Üsküdar, twice as many, in a more conservative neighborhood, yeah, twice as many pro-government as opposition floats there, or groups there. So it's really, everyone's really working right to the end, I think. It's a very difficult question to answer based on that. I mean, Erdogan does have a lot of momentum, having already secured a majority in the parliament. So I think it's likely he will probably just about get it across the line. But I wouldn't write off the opposition either. I don't want to be called foreign powers dış güçler, trying to win the election just now, or on the other side, I don't want to be called an Islamist living in the West and dictating what Turkey should do either. But yeah, that's kind of where I am at the moment, I'd say.
Okay, cool. Thanks for that, Edward.
Pleasure.
Ertan, I'll come to you next, my friend.
In a nutshell, I think Erdogan's going to win, even if Sinan Ogan's votes are split 50-50. That should put Erdogan through on about 52% to Kılıçdaroğlu's 48%. Could be a greater margin. Well, I hope that after Erdogan wins, that's how certain I am that he's going to win. After he wins, I hope that he can heal some of the wounds and end some of the polarization that he's caused within the country, and maybe bring people together on a genuine basis. And I also hope that Kılıçdaroğlu resigns after this defeat, because I don't know of a single leader in the world, political leader, who has faced so many defeats to the same person over and over again and still won't resign. I hope for a stronger opposition leader who can actually, if not eventually become the government of Turkey, at least give the government of Turkey some competition, give them a reason to keep working harder and keep striving to win the people over. Because that's the type of politics that Turkey needs right now. And I feel that with the opposition that we currently have in Turkey, that's not happening. So that's what my hope is for Turkey after this election.
Brilliant, Ertan. So you want a healthier democracy, effectively, a stronger democracy. Emine, final thoughts from you, my friend, in terms
Okay. I honestly don't have any idea what's going to happen. But I know what I want. I want a country that's run without using religion as a tool. I want a country that continues to forge really strong relations with the African nations. I want a country that's going to pull itself out of poverty so that more Turkish people will have a better quality of life. And I want to see a country that's going to develop and go to the next level. It deserves to go. So whoever can deliver that, for me, will be the best man. I've experienced too many elections, and I honestly don't have any clue who will come first. But those are what I want for Turkey, and I think those are what Turkey needs. It's been a pleasure speaking with you all and hearing the different thoughts and views. Let the best man win. Let the best, honest, and healthy man win.
Well, on that note, I think for anyone who is still with us, watching and listening, I take my hat off to you, because this has been a deep, intense discussion on Turkish politics and the elections which are currently taking place in Turkey. My guests are all, I believe, on Twitter, so you can follow them. So I'll quickly go through the screen. Emine is available to follow on Twitter. Her handle is @Eminations. Ertan, you are also on Twitter, I do believe.
Recently closed Twitter down for personal reasons. However, I'm not ruling out a comeback. So you can alternatively follow me on LinkedIn for the time being.
Okay, wonderful. And Edward, you are on Twitter, aren't you, my friend? You could confirm the handle.
That is Yahya Rowe.
That's it. That's the one. Okay, everyone, you've been watching Bandofla or listening to Bandofla. Really hope you've enjoyed the discussion as much as I have. I think our guests, Emine, Ertan and Edward, have all really contributed some quality points on the discussion on the subject of the election in Turkey. You can follow Bandofla on Twitter, _Bandofla, BANDOFLA, and on YouTube, simply search Bandofla. We're on all decent podcast platforms. You've been listening to Fevzi Hussein, and again, my sincere thanks to all three guests. We wish you all well. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye bye.